Welcome to the stream if you're just joining now. It's kind of fun to be back doing this again this week. I'm really enjoying the fact that where I'm at, it's now almost springtime officially. So that's great. It's warming up. I can actually get outside and take a walk instead of having to run on the treadmill indoors. It's just nice to get some fresh air without it being so crazily cold like it's been over the last few months here. If you're just joining today, this is Think With Me Thursday here on Effective Remote Work. The gist of what this is I'll spend a little time going through some articles or things that I've found on the internet and just highlighting them, talking through the ideas. I've got a couple queued up for today. One article is titled, "The Busier You Are, the More You Need Quiet Time," from the Harvard Business Review. Second one is titled from the Wall Street Journal, "Tech Companies Are Reopening Their Offices, but Tech Work Has Changed Forever." It's kind of a look at the changes that have happened due to the pandemic, due to the exposure of remote work, even some regards, I think probably taking a look at some of the benefits that are being removed at big companies like Facebook, and how that changes things for workers too. There's very much a shaking around that's going on in that realm of things. But if you're just joining us, let us know in the chat where you're coming from. Would love to hear from you. I do have a little bit of time at the end today for some Q&A. I'll have to wrap up in about an hour as I have another obligation to get to after this. But yeah, if you have any questions about Obsidian, personal knowledge management, remote work, personal productivity, this idea of holistic productivity that I've been talking about a lot on the channel, would love to hear from you because I think there's a lot of value in having these conversations. I want to hear what's on your mind, and I want to hear what you're wrestling with, what you're struggling with, and if there's anything that I can help you figure out along the way. We're in this together. I definitely don't see myself as any kind of a guru by any means. I've been around productivity for over a decade now, but I don't have it all figured out. I don't even have my own productivity figured out half of the time. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of this. So if you're just joining, say hi in the chat. Love to hear from where you're from, and start the conversation in just a minute. Something fun about me is I love coffee. I got into coffee probably, well, it was while I was doing an internship in a city, probably 2008 or so. I was in college and I never really gotten into coffee too much prior to that, but there was a really good craft coffee shop in the town that I was living in at the time, and it wrecked me in a lot of ways. It really changed my outlook on coffee and how good and amazing it can be. Sadly, where I live right now, there's not much for craft coffee. There's some decent coffee shops in town, but nothing that I would consider at the craft level. So I'm a little bummed about that. So I've been trying to work on making my own coffee at home and making it good and decent. But again, welcome everybody joining in the chat. We'll get going with the Think With Me portion in just a minute here as we get started. Also, I'd love to hear from you too. If you have any feedback about these live streams, if you find these valuable or not, if you find these enjoyable to listen to. I've heard from a number of people that they enjoy just how chill they are, which I like that too. I'm not a very rambunctious person, I guess, to put it that way. But I love just sitting down and talking through deep ideas. And so I think it'd be fun to continue to do these with you, especially if you find them valuable. Something I definitely enjoy myself. And with that, we're going to hop over to the desktop. Okay, so first article today, as I mentioned earlier, the link is in the description for these, by the way. I thought ahead enough to actually do that today, so instead of having to pop them in the chat as we're going. But this one is titled "The Busier You Are, the More You Need Quiet Time," and it's a dive into some of the neuroscience behind why you need space in your day. So we're going to do this, and one thing I'm going to do in this process is I'm going to use the Readwise highlighter. It's a browser plugin where you can highlight directly in the browser to be able to get these highlights into Readwise. You can tag them, you can add notes, you can delete them right from reading them in the browser. This is like one of the most game-changing things too. Just going to look something up here too before we start. Just a moment. Can't remember that link. Hold on, I gotta go to a different browser here to grab something. Sorry. There we go. That's what I need. Okay. Just a moment. I wanted to share something with you too in case you wanted to go down this route. Just sorry here. Okay. All right, this is all I wanted to do. Of course, now YouTube is being copying is being great with it. Sorry. My ridiculousness here. Okay. I was just going to share this in the chat, but if you want to sign up for Readwise and support what we're doing at the channel here, you can get a full 60-day trial using my affiliate link, which I'll post in the chat. So if you do sign up to Readwise, it would help support the channel. No extra cost to you. Plus, you get an extra double trial length for that. So feel free to hop in and use Readwise if you want to. This is what we're using today. I love Readwise for its capabilities to gather all these highlights together. It's actually become a pretty core part of my daily routine to go through and revisit these highlights, and then to, even for these live streams, that's how I get these highlights into Obsidian and then review those highlights inside of the vault, creating permanent notes out of them, connecting other thoughts together too. This is kind of the beginning of the process here where I found the article that I wanted to visit, and then I'm going to go and do an initial read through because I haven't read it yet, and then highlight along the way. So usually how the process goes is first I'll start finding the article, collect them. I'll read through it, do an initial highlight, and then in Obsidian I'll go through and do further highlighting or bolding on things that I find are important, or I'll connect other articles or books, ideas to that. Sometimes I'll flesh out further thoughts in a separate connected permanent note to it. And so, like I said, this is kind of at the top of the information funnel that I have. So we'll dig into this here. Let me know if you're just joining too. If you're in the chat, say hi. If you're on Twitter or on LinkedIn, I apologize. I don't think there's a way for me to see chat messages through Restream here if there's chat available. But do say hi over on those platforms, and I'll check it after the stream, and I will weigh in as well there. But thanks for joining. I really appreciate you watching along. So it says here, recent interview with Vox's Ezra Klein. Serious thinkers and writers should get off Twitter. Hey, Shanna. Welcome. I find this... Oh, I got to turn on the highlighter here. Helps to do that sometimes. This, I think, is interesting because it reminds me of when John Mayer quit Twitter, because he was finding himself not being able to think beyond 140 character thoughts anymore as a prolific songwriter. but it is true that there's a lot of noise. One of the things that I've seen that's impacted myself is, okay, so two things. Kind of first, one of the things that's really impacted me in today's modern technology age is the fact that it's so easy to get pulled into what other people are saying and thinking and doing before you even get going for the day. It's really easy for me to want to check my email or to log into work conversations or to see what's happening on Twitter or on the news. And when I do that in the morning, one of the things that happens is that I get completely distracted. And I notice that I do not do my best work in the morning, which is usually my prime time for getting work done, when I've already loaded other people's thoughts and other stimulation, outside stimulation, into my head. It's different when I have to deal with things at home, like if I have to help kids with things, because it's just somehow in the natural flow of life. But this outside stimulation through a screen, it just, for whatever reason, connects with my brain in a different way. The other thing that I have found is just the overabundance of information can sometimes be really difficult to keep up with in a lot of ways when I'm consuming things on Twitter or Facebook or other parts of the internet. So it's one of those things that's really challenging, because if I'm trying to get something purposeful done in a day, I find myself getting overloaded, mentally overloaded, when I spend too much time consuming outside information. So it's almost like I have to shut myself off from the world so I can focus. And then when I'm ready to come up for air, when I'm done with what I would call that deep work block, then I can get out. Well, let me think of the right way to put this. Then I can get myself into the world and see what's happening in the world. I know people like CGP Grey do this, when they're writing. If you follow the Cortex podcast at all, which I'm a big fan of, I know he tends to block himself out from the world for like half the day. And then it's in the late afternoon where he's not at his best that he starts to, see what's going on in the world, type of thing like that. So anyway, I just think that's really interesting, because there is a lot of challenges that noise, the information noise, even if it's high signal information, it just adds stuff to our brains where we have to process it before we can move on. It creates all these open loops, I guess, in a lot of regards, especially if it's something that's angering or frustrating or depressing. We pick up on that information and that emotion that other people are conveying. I think this is true, and I would also relate this to Cal Newport and his idea of the deep. Now you can see here, these double brackets don't do anything. But when they sync over to Obsidian, they'll be automatically linked already. So I don't even have to think about it when I get over there. I also want to connect this thought. So this one says, I should zoom in here too. Sorry about that. Recent studies are showing that taking time for silence restores the nervous system, helps sustain energy, and conditions our mind to be more adaptive and responsive to the complex environments in which so many of us now live, work, and lead. I want to tie this to Chris Bailey and his idea of hyperfocus. Scatter focus. I think one thing that's interesting is that the productivity world is very much loves and almost infatuated with the ideas of deep work and super high productivity and high output, high effectiveness, high efficiency. But there is a counterbalance that must happen here as well. That's, I think, what is the interesting proposition from Chris Bailey's book, Hyperfocus, because you have a duality here in some ways. You have, on one hand, hyper focus, where you're pushing everything else out of your mind to focus on one thing. But then you have scatter focus, which is allowing all of the things that want to take up your attentional space to do so. And what's happening in that time is that your brain is doing a lot of subconscious work connecting dots. And when those dots are being connected, that's when we make creative ideas. That's when we close open loops. That's when we get this benefit of restoring the nervous system, because it allows our brain to process through what it's been consuming. The highlighter extension. Yeah, that is the Readwise highlighter extension. I should put this in the description of the video. I'll edit it real quick. But if you want to check out Readwise and you haven't already, I'll put an affiliate link in the description. I'm just updating it now. So I can't remember if you guys can see the chat history if you've joined. So if you want to take a look over in the description, if you refresh your page, it should show. I'm not sure if it'll automatically update without refreshing the page, but it's the Readwise highlighter, and then it integrates in with Readwise. If you use my affiliate link for Readwise, you'll get a 60-day trial of it if you want to check that out a little bit further. Plus, you get to support the channel here too if you so desire to do that. If anybody's worked, raise your hand if you've worked in an open office floor plan. That's me. I have done that before. And as this study concludes, of 43,000 workers, that noise and distraction associated with open office plans outweighed the anticipated but unproven benefits like increasing morale and productivity boosts from unplanned interactions. So what that tells me is that there is very much still a mentality in business. There's a myth that's been embraced that the open office is the way to do things because you get these serendipitous connections with people. You run into a coworker from HR and you start a conversation and you think of something that would be really beneficial for the business and it gets going. But I can count on one hand the number of times that happened when I was working in the corporate world. In fact, more often than not, it just resulted in more busy work for me, where people would tap me on the shoulder and pull me into meetings. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of remote work is the fact that you can't just tap somebody on the shoulder. You've got to block time off with them to get their attention, to get specific time with them. That can be a detriment in some regards too, but overall, for productivity's sake and the ability for people to have control over their schedule, I think that's a really big thing. I'm tying this to Range by David Epstein, which is a book about being a generalist. Because the concept of clear creative thinking is something that is inherently tied to generalists. Specialists also, very much do clear creative thinking and have need for that. But I think of it as a generalist myself. I think of it as important. Just because a lot of times I have a million different things in different facets of my life that are going through my mind. And so, I have to have knowledge of a lot of different things. Some of them are at a much deeper level than others, and some of them are just at a shallow level enough to kind of grasp and understand the concepts and maybe be halfway competent at it. But I think what I've seen in my own life is that a lack of silence, a lack of downtime basically, has had a dramatic impact on my ability to think clearly and engage in creative thinking because I get overwhelmed. I don't take the time that I need for my brain to unwind and process and restore itself. So, kind of the gist of what they're saying here, I'm going to put, instead of just linking another thought here, I'm going to summarize this in a different way. The kind of the mental break that we need that's restorative is one where we feel safe and can let down our protective guards. I think this one's important for creators here. I've heard a lot of advice in the creative world, or creator world rather, about, and even seen it in productivity circles too, about create more than consuming, which I get. I get the gist behind that. And it's about balance. So instead of taking in everyone else's stuff, make your own stuff, or take in other people's stuff for the purpose of remixing it and making your own stuff. That makes a lot of sense. But I think this is probably a specific plight that creators would have too, is we're always thinking about what we need to say next, what we need to make next, where we need to take the business that we're building next. What the algorithm is going to like the most next. I think that's a tricky thing. What's going to go viral next? But as this says here, it's tough to make room for truly different perspectives or radically new ideas if we do that. Here's some nice actionable items. I like that. Punctuate meetings with 5 minutes of quiet time. That's a really good idea. I even know tools like Calendly. If you use that to book meetings with people, it'll allow you to automatically say, do not allow meetings to go back to back, where you can have anywhere from 5 to 60 minutes or even more than that in between meetings. That's really a really positive thing. The other thing too with that is that it allows you, when you give yourself that break, it allows your brain to reset and readjust so that you're fully cognitively available for the next meeting. Because we have attention space. We definitely have attention space that gets eaten up by meetings. And if we go from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting, we're just filling that attentional space up with stuff. Half the time we're thinking about the thing that we last did, or we get so tired that all we can think about is what we're going to eat for lunch or what we had for lunch or what we're going to do at home that evening. And so even intentionally bookending meetings with 5 or 10 minutes of quiet time can really improve your ability to focus. But the downside is that we're fighting an uphill battle in a lot of regards because there's so much pressure, even in productivity circles that I have seen, to be hyper efficient with our time. I don't think there's value in doing that. I'm very much a Pareto principle thinker. If you know what that is, Pareto principle is the 80-20 rule, where 80-20, or if I talk correctly, 80% of your output comes from 20% of your inputs. It's an economic principle, but it shows up all over the place. And so I am a big believer in that when it comes to how your time is used and how my time is used. So, spending 5 minutes between meetings, shooting replies back to emails or text messages, or trying to get that one next little thing chipped off on a project that you can really fast. It might be hyper efficient, but I think it diminishes in other areas. I think it's definitely would fall outside of that 20% of activities that gets you 80% of your productivity. And also, it is, I think, a complete myth that a person can be 100% productive. If you're hitting 80% productivity on a day in a workplace, I think you're probably at the top of probably where most people are even normally at. There's a lot of wasted time in the workplace, so just keep that in mind. I think sometimes we end up in the productivity world chasing after goals that are really not achievable or sustainable long term. You might be able to hit 100% productivity one day, but then the next 3 days you might be totally shot. And so it's better to give your brain space to recharge. Take a silent afternoon in nature. I like that. I haven't done that very well, mainly because I have young kids. Doesn't really happen. Going to media fast. That one is something I could see being very, very reasonable to do. Something I've tried to do and have been terrible at sticking to it is taking 1 day a week where I try to keep my phone as far away from me as possible. I'm not going on and consuming media. I might read a book or something like that. But that I'm trying to be present and giving my brain space to decompress from all the inputs. My schedule's been really weird lately, though, just due to family obligations and stuff like that. So it's been hard to stick to it. My brain has been on a lot lately. Let's see. Take the plunge and try a meditation retreat. Silent retreat. I've never done one of those before. I don't know if any of you have, but I think it would be interesting to try sometime. I don't know. I'm just going to highlight each one of these little things here so I capture them. It's always nice to have some stuff to come back to. I think that was an interesting article. If I were to just kind of summarize my thoughts on it, is silence is powerful. And when we don't take time for ourselves, we can get overloaded. But when we do make intentional space to separate ourselves from outside inputs and just be present, not in a necessarily mindful or meditative sense, but to be aware of where we are in the moment, that's actually quite restorative for us as people. It allows us to be more productive. It allows us to be more healthy, more present with the people that matter most to us. And it gives us greater benefits. As I mentioned with the 80-20 rule, if you apply the Pareto principle to this, some of the activities that we try to shoehorn into our schedule just does not make sense. They're actually activities that don't further the big picture. They don't push the needle forward. And instead, they take away from the time that we need to truly recharge. We're holistic people. We have so many different facets to us, and every facet of it matters, not just work. The next article, if you want to follow along, is in the description. It's the Wall Street Journal article titled "Tech Companies Are Reopening Their Offices, but Tech Work Has Changed Forever." Do the same thing. Look, I've highlighted some things in here already. I didn't even realize I did that. Did I do this one last week? I might have. Might have. And I don't think I even realized it. Whoops. Let me open up Obsidian and see if there's anything else that we can take a look at today. Yeah, Shanna, there's a lot of stuff. I know I get like so many ideas and thoughts and feelings about it. So I definitely recommend taking some time and doing some writing on it, like even just in your daily notes in Obsidian. This is where like I really love using a software like this because it's just a safe place for me to decompress my own thoughts about big picture ideas like this. Let's see. Interesting. Okay, this one kind of was goofy. We'll do this one though. I think this will be interesting because it's very much related to this. So I'm gonna pop this one in to Obsidian. I had some goofy thing happen with the sync here, so I'll show you in just a second. But this one is from James Clear, the Atomic Habits dude. It's called The Theory of Cumulative Stress, How to Recover When Stress Builds Up. If you haven't seen this article before, it's from a few years ago, I think, but the ideas in it are pretty interesting, especially when it comes to stress and recovery. And then relating it to the last article as well, how we need silence and dead space in our lives, basically, for our brains to recover. So the highlights I have here is, we'll start here. I usually lift heavy 3 days per week. For a long time, I thought I should be able to handle 4 days per week. However, every time I added the extra workout in, I would be just fine for a few weeks and then end up exhausted or slightly injured about a month into the program. This was frustrating. Why could I handle it for 4 or 5 weeks, but not longer than that? Eventually, I realized the issue. Stress is cumulative. 3 days per week was a pace I could sustain. When I added that 4th day in, this additional stress started to build and accumulate. At some point, the burden became too big and I would get exhausted or injured. Something goofy happened with this highlighting here, but that's okay. I'm just gonna fix it. Fix it by deleting. James Clear. So I think this is an interesting idea. Stress is cumulative. I'm gonna copy this URL and got it on the site too. Fun. Sometimes when you come back to a page that you've saved already in Reader, the highlights will come with, which is pretty cool. So you can see what you've already highlighted, like we saw in that last article that I pulled up in the browser here. I like this image. The other cool thing is you can highlight images in this to pull into your notes. So that's a win feature. This is an important story to highlight here. So he's telling a story. A professor that he had been one of the senior executives at Sears, Roebuck and Company. They were in the middle of a massive national campaign for a major brand launch, and his professor was leading the operation. 2 months prior to the launch day, flying all over the country, crisscrossing the country, flight after flight, run his department from the road. For weeks on end, he would meet with the media and business partners all day, answer emails and phone calls all night, squeeze in 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and wake up to do it all over again. The week before the big launch day, his body gave out on him and had to be rushed to the hospital. Major organs started to fail from the chronic stress. He spent the next 8 days lying in a hospital bed, unable to do anything as the launch day came and went. I would say that that's an extreme case of burnout, to be frank. When pushed to the absolute limit, that's what stress can do to your body, unfortunately. This image, I think, is a great representation of what life can look like. And I don't necessarily agree with just saying that this is your body. I would say this is you, because you're multifaceted. It's not just your body. You have a mind and a will and an emotions, as well, that really need attention. So it's not just the physical outputs that have challenges or create problems for us, but it's also the mental strains and the mental inputs, the mental outputs, the concerns of life, is what I would kind of sum it. The stress being the things that concern us the most. It's almost like worry, I guess, is another word you could use. Things that we worry about. One of the biggest stressors that I run into a lot of times is worrying about being on time for things. So there's my grandfather was a very punctual person. In fact, it got to be when he was older that he was, he said he would show up at 9 and he'd be there at 8:30. So it's just like, he is just antsy to get there. And I get that. But this pressure to be punctual can create stress. If we're concerned about time, and there's a lot in the productivity world to think that pushes us to be concerned about time. Are you using your time to the fullest? Are you using your time to the best? And this is where I like some of what Oliver Burkeman's ideas in his book 4,000 Weeks that he talks about, which is it's framing productivity in the lens of we only have so much time on Earth while we're here alive. And it's a little bit of a morbid thought and a little crazy to think about sometimes, but it's interesting to think about, I think, too, because it's a reality. And so it's a matter of, do we really want to fill our days so full and pour ourselves out so much every single day where it becomes a problem for ourselves in the long term? People are really bad at long-term thinking overall. It's just kind of a reality of human nature, unfortunately. But if we can start to step back and try to intentionally think long-term about the habits and the practices that we have, and just being conscious too about how we're handling our lives, I think there's a lot of positive benefit that can come from that. I like what he says here too. The forces that can drain your bucket aren't all negative, of course. To live a productive life, it can be important to have some things flowing out of your bucket. In fact, I would say that you have to have things pouring out of your bucket. If you're just sitting and consuming and not doing things, I've been in seasons of life like that where I felt aimless. I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. Not doing things was more stressful than doing things because I was just kind of in this place of analysis paralysis in a lot of regards. So having, like, there needs to be, like in this diagram, there needs to be input, but there also has to be output as well. Otherwise, we get stagnant in some ways. And sometimes this output can look like just being kind to other people. That can be a positive output that sometimes also fills us back up too. So it's not just a linear flow here. Sometimes it's cyclical depending on the activities that we take. I like this idea here too. Recovery is not negotiable. So he puts this in the context of weightlifting and physical efforts, but this very much applies to mental efforts and work that we're doing. I've noticed this in myself as well. There have been times where I have struggled, well, where I like am super on it one day. You know, like I get to work at a good time. I am heavily and deeply focused on a project. And because I like to finish things in one sitting as much as possible, it's not always a good thing. But the challenge that I often run into with that is if I sit down, I get into something, I want to push as far as I can in a day, I might put or try to put 6 hours of what I would call deep focused work on that project. And I feel great about it that day. But then the day after, and more likely 2 days after, I hit a brick wall because I haven't recovered. Because when you overexert yourself, you might be able to do it once, but you're not going to be able to do it consistently over a period of time. That, I think, is something for all of us to keep in mind as we're working. You can push hard, but what's better is a consistent push. So where you are working, 3-4 hours of deep work a day, whatever you can sustain reasonably. And then beyond that, handling the manageable stuff, the other things as you can. I actually just saw an email from Oliver Berkman, speaking of him, where he had this idea of the 3-3-3 method for structuring his day. Let me see if I can pull it up on his site. I don't know if it's public, but no, it's just a newsletter. Let me see if I can pull that up. Yeah, Shanna, I think that's a really interesting point. Just to read what she said here. To add, these productivity-focused circles can be especially toxic for people that don't fit into the expectations from neurotypical society, going through a different kind of recovery from this. Yeah, I think I appreciate the fact that there's starting to be more of an understanding of how people need different things. I try to be really cognizant of that, in the things that I create, and just try to share like, hey, this is the way I do it. It might work for you, but it might not too. But I know I'm not perfect at that, for one. But it's, I can really relate with that. Not necessarily because I'm very much, I think, a neurotypical person. But I do process things differently in certain ways. Yeah, I'm really glad. I hope I can provide a balanced take here. And I'm always willing to listen to other people's perspectives on things because I know I don't have it all figured out. I'm just trying to share from what I've seen and what I've experienced in myself and share a bit of that. That's all I can really do. But if I can take input from other people and try to stay humble in how I'm teaching things and just say, hey, I don't have it all figured out, but here's what I've seen work for me. I hope that it's helpful for people. But anyway, like I said, I feel like I'm more on the neurotypical side of things myself. But I've struggled with productivity and that feeling of it being toxic. Just a short story here. I went through, well, it was probably in 2013 or 2014. I was part of this community online that was really intriguing and engaging. It was for creators, and I was really dreaming about being a creator and a business owner. And I really was drawn to this group of people. I really liked what they had to say. But the leader of this group was an extreme overworker and often pushed himself to work 17 hours a day. And I was like, okay, well, that's just him. But then I started to see this culture develop in this group where there was people who were just trying to push it and bust it all hours of the day, where they might go to work 8 hours and then they would work on their side project for another 4 or 5 hours when they had time, or every waking moment of the day that they had. And I started doing that. And I had a friend pull me aside and say, you need to slow down. You don't need to move so quickly. You don't need to push so hard. There's a lot of thought and advice in productivity worlds where I think it is not healthy for a lot of people, especially people who are naturally driven to accomplish things or have dreams that they genuinely want to pursue. Sometimes the best way to pursue something is slowly. And that's exactly what I've tried to do here on this channel, is that, I was just thinking about this the other day, that I've been doing stuff for effective remote work for the last 4 years. And I launched the Obsidian Made Simple course with Francesco D'Alessio a couple years ago now. But that's really been the only money-making thing that I've done with it. I had a podcast that was sitting about 1,000 users a month per episode, which was really cool to see. I was doing this YouTube channel, which miraculously exploded in growth very early on, which I'm very grateful for. And I'm glad to have you all here with me on the journey with this. And then I started another podcast, and I kind of fell back into this mindset of pushing hard again to try to grow it, but not really having a purposeful way to approach it or a sustainable way. And I was just pumping lots of content out, but didn't really have a purpose behind doing it other than the fact that I had lots of things that I wanted to say, and I didn't really want to keep it bottled up anymore. But then last summer, I hit another spot where I just crashed kind of in a way and felt really burnt out from a lot of different things. And so that's why I had to take a 6-month break from even creating anything so that I could recover and get myself back on track. When we push too hard and too soon, sometimes I think we overexert ourselves. And when we have voices in our ears, in our podcasts, in our YouTube videos, and the things that we're consuming on a day-to-day basis saying, you got to 10x crush it. You got to hit that 100x goal. You got to work. The thing that happens is that we elevate work so high in our lives that we forget about taking care of ourselves. And when we forget to take care of ourselves and to take care of the people around us, then things start to fall apart a little bit. Work is really important, but it's not the most important thing. It's only one part of life. So that's kind of my rant on that today. But I think it's really important to think about productivity in context of everything else in life. That includes your personality. That includes whatever other uniqueness that you have as a person. If you have ADHD or something else that causes you to see and or process the world in a way that's different from other people. If you work a job as a freelancer, if you have a full-time job in the corporate world, if you're a fully asynchronous remote worker or a digital nomad, or if you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, like all of those things impact what productivity looks like to a person. And one of the biggest drawbacks of productivity culture, I think, in the last 5 years has been focusing so heavily on one-size-fits-all advice. This is the best way to do things. Follow these 10 steps to earn $1 million. Obviously, a lot of us know that those things are kind of shams, but there are still many people who bite onto that idea. And I think we as teachers in this space, we as people who are talking about productivity, have a responsibility of leadership to do right by the people who are following us. I think this is one of the dangers and challenges of the creator economy right now, is that people are building followings. They're saying things to people. People are following their advice. And there's not a lot of responsibility for that. Every person who is a creator, every person who is teaching people things has a responsibility to lead the people that are following them well. And that includes trying to make sure that they're taking care of those people. Even though I might not have a direct relationship with you and know how what I am saying is affecting you, when I'm saying it, I need to be conscious and cognizant that what I am saying has an impact on people. And so having this place of a platform is a big responsibility, I think. And I guess I try to take that seriously anyway. I try to. And I want to do right by the people who have said, you know what, I really like this Justin guy and what he has to say. And so if they're choosing to listen to what I have to say, I want to do the best that I can and saying things that are empowering and make sense to people and don't put this heavy burden on people. I know I haven't been completely successful at that, and I know I haven't been completely cognizant about things that I say all the time. But I'm totally willing to own that too when it comes up. Anyway, that's a random little rant on productivity. I actually I have to sign off here in just a minute. But before we go, I did want to just plug again. If you're watching, we've talked a lot about Readwise today. It's a service that I am very, very happy with. I really enjoy it. If you haven't signed up for Readwise or tried it yet, feel free to use my affiliate code. You get a double length trial, 60 days. There's no obligation to sign up or pay, but if you want to try it, feel free to use that affiliate code. And then if you do decide to sign up for Readwise, then you get to support the channel and what we're doing here at Effective Remote Work in the process. Shanna, don't worry about it. In fact, I love the fact that you guys get to redirect my streams. It's one of the most fun things about doing streams. I did my podcast process for, I think I started that in 2019, and I did that for a little over 2 years. And that was all solely just me talking to the microphone, aside from a couple interviews that I did. And so that's what I love about doing live streams, is because you all get to interrupt my thought process and ask questions and interject your thoughts, and we get to have a conversation. Whereas when I'm on a podcast, I don't get to have a conversation with you unless you decide to shoot me an email or something like that. So this is fun. don't ever feel bad about derailing the stream. I love the fact that we get to have conversations on here. Anyway, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for joining today. Again, if as I've mentioned on streams prior, feel free to head on over to effectiveremotework.com. Join our community over there if you want to continue the conversation asynchronously. I've got some things in the works for effective remote work too that I don't have all the way figured out yet, but I'm excited to dive into them more. I'm looking at how, I might be able to do some kind of a membership site or additional courses that we're going to offer, things of that sort. So be looking for that as we go and as we grow. Anyway, have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching.